something's got to change, right? You already know that. So that comes into that negative loop, that negative energy, the habits that continue to compound. There's going to come a day in your life when something has to end and something starts anew.
That requires time, that requires space, that requires silence. And in today's world, that's hard as shit to find. Like everything in today's world is keeping you from that state that you need to be in to achieve, to think.
Like he just questions everything naturally, doesn't mean anything negative by it. And, he's just questioning everything, Aaron Rodgers. And my fucking book, like literally just came up in the book. And I'm like, man, so what I've been thinking about for a few days, and you want to talk about law of attraction and what you were talking about the other day, shit just came right up in my brain, right? So law of attraction, what does 2025 look like? And then, what am I going to change next year from a personal and professional perspective, right? And then I watched, I know you're not a big sports fan, but Aaron Rodgers, his new documentary just came out a couple days ago, I guess, or maybe it's been out longer. I don't know.
It's a couple days ago. I haven't seen it, but I saw that it is out.
So anyways, I think he's a super misunderstood person, right? And I have a lot of common, I don't want to say I have a lot of common things, but I have a few common things with him. And like he's always been on my mind in terms of like what happened through COVID, what he stood for through COVID, right? He's pretty holistic in terms of like his mindset, both spiritually and physically, right? And so I wanted to see it, man. And then pretty much what he talks about in that docu-series kind of leads up a little bit into today's conversation, which then I woke up, obviously told you my story, started to read meditations. Oh, shit, dude. If you don't have this, you got to get it because it's a great journaling topic. And you can just like read a small section. That's all I do. And then I just try to like find something that's relevant. I'll just flip the random pages and then I'll date it and I'll go back and reread it a couple of times throughout the year, right? So, and then I came on today's topic of conversation. I flipped second page in, boom, same quote that I've been thinking about for the past few days. Kind of ties in with the whole Aaron Rodgers docu-series, and it ties in with Kirk in 2020-25. Whatever. So I'm super pumped up today.
What is it?
So the topic that I got is like just clearing your mind from the outside noise, right? And completely removing yourself from any exterior expectation, right? If you had, and you and I have talked about this in a couple chats over time, right? And it almost, what's even funnier is as we're getting closer to the anniversary of this podcast, right? Is that the conversation that we talked about when we first started the podcast was like, if you had like that childlike aspiration where nobody was inside your head, right? And you had nothing to compare yourself to, right? Whether it was externally or internally, what would you do and how would you do it, right? Same thing going into 2025. And I think like Aaron Rodgers questions a lot of things. He never followed the status quo. He used his voice. He was vocal. He's extremely misunderstood by the media. The media was just trying to portray a narrative, right? And that's that external static noise that you've got. And in our lives, that's other people, that's professional, that's personal, friendship, close to us or not close to us. We're always trying to adapt to what we're in. And we're not really our true authentic self. And maybe you are, but you're not 100% your authentic self. Just because you can't be. If you're selling a house, you can't be. You gotta find the conversation. You gotta die into it. Shit like that. If I'm doing something professionally, I've got to find relationships with people. I've got to find common ground. You got to watch what you say, how you say it, because of incorrect perceptions, right? So he kind of discusses that entire narrative throughout the whole entire series. And that's something that I've been thinking about, and we've talked about it through this podcast a lot. But I'm really going into 2025. Like for me, like there's some things that I can't control externally quite yet. But the biggest question mark going into 2025 is how do I control the inner dialogue, right? And so going into the Marcus Aurelius conversation real fast, I'm just going to read it so I don't fuck this up. But he just talks about your own mind, right? And not to worry about what other people are thinking. And his excerpt is you need to avoid certain things in your train of thought. Everything random, everything irrelevant, and certainly everything of self-importance or malice. You need to get used to the winnowing your thoughts so that if somebody says what you're thinking about, you can respond at once and truthfully that you are thinking this or thinking that, and it would be obvious at once from your answer that your thoughts were straightforward and considerate ones. The thoughts of an unselfish person, one unconcerned with pleasure and with sensual indulgence generally, with squabbling, with slander and envy, or anything else that you'd be ashamed to be caught thinking of. So think about that. And to me, that just went super deep, and I know my voice went in and out real fast, but like when you're in your own head and other people are talking to you, hey, what are you thinking about? What's on your mind today? Like, you're never really truthful. You're never, unless it's like your significant other that you're really close with, your best friend, oh, nothing, even though something's on your mind, personally, professionally, whatever it is, right? So like your noise inside here is constantly going. How do you shut that shit off to all the things that are irrelevant, that don't mean anything, so you can limit the fuzziness, right, of your thought process? That's how I took that shit, and it's super deep, and that's the question I have going into next year.
That's an interesting point of conversation because, like, obviously we've been discussing personally. I've been in, let's just say, a negative state or a negative thought train, and I've had to sit down, and obviously we're doing the 30-day thing. Obviously, no one that's watching this knows about that, but in reality, I've been spending a lot of time clearing my thoughts. So when I personally, and it happens to everyone, get in a state of over negativity, it is a thought train that begins, right? And that's it. It just starts. What we do after that, as literally in this quote, is either you follow that train of thought or you to yourself go, no, that's not the train of thought I'm going to have, and go in a different direction. Well, over the course of the last, let's just say, month or so, it's been a few weeks since, but over the course of the last month or so, I would have a particularly not good thought. I don't know, just something that doesn't help build me, something that's not getting me in the direction, a thought of lacking, a thought of just, let's just say, not worthiness, not being good enough, a thought of something along the lines of just literally something that's not beneficial. It doesn't have to be anything specific, but for me, it was just more or less thoughts of lacking. And then that thought train would continue and continue and continue. And if it happens once, it's fine. If it happens in 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, it's kind of just like a habit where it's just like snowballing. And if you let that shit happen, and this is something that over the last couple of weeks, I've had to sit down and literally control that. And in my sense of control, I mean, if I start having this thought, instead of thinking about it, instead of focusing on whatever that thought is, do something different. And over the course of the last couple of weeks, for me, it's been helping significantly. But if I have a lackluster thought, find something to do, whether that be take a note, think about an idea for YouTube, think about the podcast, just like take my brain in a completely different direction. And to be honest, it doesn't even have to be productive. Like, it could literally be just like go to the kitchen and do some dishes or something, but something that takes me out of that specific thought, that specific mentality, so that I can do something else. Because, like, for me personally, when you have a negative thought, it's not something that's there all the time, right? But it's one of those things that if you let creep in, and we've had this discussion in terms of guard the gates of your mind, whether it's a comment that somebody else says, or it's an attitude that somebody has, or something along those lines, when a little something creeps in, you need something to push you in a different direction. And a lot of the times, for some people, you could just sit down and go, no, and then that's it. That's the end of it, right? That's not me. I don't care about this. This isn't a thought that I want to go into. But not everything is like that, right? There are certain things where I can just like, nah, I'm good, right? But there are certain things that sometimes I want to think about, and I'm questioning, like, why is this happening, or what is going on? And when that starts to happen over the course of days, you begin to build, I guess, negative momentum. But you have to literally flip it and do the opposite. And for me, that's just like completely changing my mind, completely focusing on something else. And once I start to do that, then I can continue being productive. But I have to find something to break that negativity, break that weird thought. It just kind of disrupt it in some way, shape, or form.
So, to take a step back for a second and just kind of highlight something, one of my favorite quotes is that no man steps in the same river twice. All right. So follow me for a second. So when I mentioned earlier that I go through this meditations, right? I read the book, I take notes, I date when I read the quote. And sometimes it hits me a little differently than it does now, right?
Yeah.
But for some reason today, I feel like not even today, but the time period over the past few weeks, I feel like everything's connected, and some of the things that I wanted to do back then, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, didn't work, or I wasn't ready for it, right? So I think
Okay.
when you look at it, and your avatar right now or your mindset right now is telling you, something's got to change, right? You already know that. So that comes into that negative loop, that negative energy, the habits that continue to compound. I think I go through that crap all the time. For me, the way I interpret it recently was like, okay, the next 2 weeks of the year, I need a recharge. Like I need a reset. And to this content's point, I'm trying to stop scrolling or stop listening to other people, stop watching YouTube videos unless it's about shit that I want to watch right now on a personal level. Like I've been looking at a lot more skateboard content lately, right? Though I'll never skateboard hardcore like I did a long time ago. I'm just trying to find a way to reset my brain and to recalibrate some things, right? And I think that's kind of what you're just trying to do as well, is you're just trying to recalibrate, reset, find some energy, whatever that may be. Ask yourself some questions that might be necessary. Even if you've asked that question 6 months ago, now might be the time to ask that question, right? You may not know the question you're trying to ask yourself or anybody out there, but there's a questioning going on inside that you got to figure out, right? And sometimes that could be going back through past content. Sometimes that could be looking forward and saying, hey, what is the future going to bring, right? And just trying to tie it all together. But for me, I just want to read the first portion of this real fast. It's a little shorter, but it opens up. And his journal entry for the day was, don't waste the rest of your time here worrying about other people unless it affects the common good. It will keep you from doing anything useful. You'll be too preoccupied with what so-and-so is doing, why, and what they're saying, and what they're thinking, and what they're up to, and all the other things that throw you off and keep you from focusing on your own mind, right? So for me, that's not just like other people, but rather a metaphor of like, don't watch the news. Don't watch, sports. Like just try to literally go out. And I think that's what captivates me a little bit about the Aaron Rodgers docuseries, is that like he's in that spiritual journey right now. And like he goes and does, ayahuasca, right? And goes down to Costa Rica a couple of times. That's a whole different conversation. But he goes off and gets a retreat, and he's in a cabin for 4 days, black, nothing, like just nothing for 4 days straight, right? Just to meditate and clear his mind before he decides to retire from the Packers and go to the Jets. Why is he doing it? You get his perspective on it. Everybody thinks he's crazy, but he's not really fucking crazy. Like he's just meditating to figure out like, what does the next step of life look like? What is life going to look like when I retire if all I know is football? How do I start to prepare myself mentally for that? Because if I don't, it's going to throw me off for a loop. And whether men are superior or not, the day that they can't be a warrior, right? And football is just modern day warriorism. Whether you're a provider for your family, whether you're a football player or basketball player, whether you're a legit warrior or not, like there's going to come a day in your life when something has to end and something starts anew. Right?
Yeah.
So then how do you go through that and prepare yourself? And I think that's, many men have that conversation when they retire. And of course, naturally, I haven't gotten to that point to really start thinking that way. But man, I'd rather start doing it now instead of waiting until I'm 64. And then like, oh shit, I'm going to retire next year. And then you hear all these, old men or, military guys they just don't stop talking about the past, or they go find another job and they can't really retire because all they know is work instead of hobbies, right? So then there's no way for them to productively channel energy, and men have to spend energy of some sort. Like objects in motion stay in motion, right? We know that. So that's all he's doing, is he's just questioning all that. So like, why not question it now? So he's just on a journey of a spiritual mind, body, and soul type question for himself. What does that translate to? And that's kind of the same thing that I want to start looking at. And it was funny. That's what I was thinking before I even watched the docuseries, right? So, going into next year, like, how do you, like, winning isn't all that matters. And he talks about that in the movie or in the series, right? But there's a lot of other things that you and I know, like, hey, winning is fun. Winning is a lot, right? It means a lot in any aspect of life. Professionally, personally, relationally, within a relationship, all kinds of crap. So, but it's not everything that matters. It's the connections you learn. We know that. We talk about the obstacle as the way quite often, right? So, the obstacle and the failure is necessary. So if we say winning is all that matters, that's actually a false statement, because you wouldn't have learned to win or won consistently unless you failed, miserably for X amount of time, right? So, and they're just really, it's all a matter of processing ego and external versus internal environment, shit like that. So just a lot to question, and I'm super excited about it right now.
That's an interesting perspective, because one of the things, that's an interesting perspective because one of the things that you mentioned is, like, people think about retirement, right? They get close to that age, they think about it, but in reality, it's not very common to do that 4-day retreat where you just sit there with your mind, because now you have to think, now you have to process, now you have to understand where you are, where you want to go. So there's plenty of people, and we've had kind of a similar discussion, not exactly this, but there's a lot of people that are kind of like drifting through life, right? You get out of school, you get out of high school, and for the military example, a lot of those people, you don't go to the military because you want to go to the military. For the most part, there are a few people that do. They want to go ahead and achieve something from the military perspective, but the grand majority of people that get there, it's an easy job, it's a well-paying job, consistent raise, good health care. So when you get out of high school and you don't particularly say, hey, I want to go this direction, you drift into the military. But that's a 6-year contract or an 8-year contract, depending on what you're doing. So by the time you get to your next batch of life, you're in a completely different place. Most people don't go into the military, for example, and plan what they want to do and achieve while they're there and what they're going to do after. They really just think, what the heck am I going to do right now? And they make that decision based on the situation that they're in, and they kind of just drift into it. So there's never a point of reflection, there's never a point of introspection, there's never a point where you actually sit back and decide what you're going to do and why you're going to do it. Most people just kind of go into it. Like, even when, I guess, when we first got started in terms of work, it was like an obligation, right? You came up with a plan afterwards, but the reason I started working, for example, at Advanced Auto Parts was because I had a friend that worked there and they got me a job, right? But that decision was not made because I want to get here and I want to learn this and I want to be able to achieve this. You have to get to a point where you're aware of what you want to do, obviously the internal thought, but a lot of people can't have that, because then you get the thoughts of, I'm not good enough. You get the thoughts of, what do I have to do to get to where I'm going? You start to realize how big the scope of work actually is. And a lot of people kind of drift through life. So being able to sit there for 3, 4, 5 days and actually think about what you want, is literally how much it takes. Because a lot of times you can't just like sit here and come up with a perfect plan. You actually have to let the thoughts flow. You have to give it time. You have to be in silence. You have to be able to just sit there quietly and let your body give you the answers. Let your thoughts come to mind in terms of how you plan to do something that you've literally never done before. Because at that point, you don't know. Like, when he was sitting there, I don't know, I haven't seen the thing, but when he was sitting there thinking about making a change, going from one team to the other, you don't know what's going to happen. Right? So you have to think about 10, 15, 20 different possibilities in terms of what's going to happen and decide on which one you're going to work at, because they're all possible. But people don't do that. They don't sit there. They don't think about what that is going to mean. Like, for example, us two, we sat here. You've been thinking about it for a while. I was thinking about it for a while. So we're here having these conversations to improve ourselves. We're not necessarily doing it for an external factor, but we're doing it for accountability to ourselves, keeping momentum, being able to have these conversations, push ourselves mentally, give ourselves, for me example, give myself a situation where I'm now forced to literally think and process thought aloud in myself, because I've been more accountable to journaling. I've been more accountable to journaling. I've been more accountable to myself, my thoughts, my meditations, separate from having this podcast. I've been way better doing this and being accountable to you than I am separately. So it puts me in a spot where I kind of have to. Obviously, you want to help people, but it is a situation that you sat down and you thought about extensively to a certain point. It wasn't just like a momentary decision. Yes, you said yes in a moment, but that thought wasn't just there. But there's a lot of people that don't have that. Like, it really is a common thing where people just kind of do shit and they don't know why. They don't sit there and think about it. They don't analyze it, because that requires time, that requires space, that requires silence. And in today's world, That's hard as shit to find. Like everything in today's world is keeping you from that state that you need to be in to achieve, to think. Thinking, one of the quotes that I've heard a while ago is, thinking is the hardest job. And where the position that you're in now and where you've been, you fully understand that, right? It's not more labor intensive. Where you are now, it doesn't require more physically from you. It doesn't require more labor. It doesn't require more hours in terms of like brute doing a task, but it requires more thought. It requires more time up here. It requires more planning. It requires more, is this going to work? Is this going to work? What are my options? Can I come up with a third option? Is there something different that I'm not seeing here? It requires the time up here, but not a lot of people are doing that.
Can you imagine, the whole time what I was thinking about, because I can't stop my mind very well. Like I'm constantly going, right? And can you imagine stopping for, a day in a dark room, no tech, nothing, nobody, and just sitting there for 24 hours? I can't even sit down for 10 minutes. Like my meditation routine right now is 5 minutes. That's it. I've dedicated 5 minutes to myself. I sit down, I put my AirPods on. I'll find like an ocean background or some rain, or I'll find a guided meditation. I'll sit down for 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, my mind is drifting towards work, right? And I think or work personally, something, that I desires, whatever it is. And then I have to go shut it off for 5 minutes. Can you imagine doing that for 24 hours or 4 days or 6 days, right? It's something that I want to do and something that we should be able to do. And it's something that would benefit us long term. So that's the question that we got to figure out with ourselves, is there's just so much static. And that goes back to, again, what Marcus was talking about specifically, like just drowned out everything that does not matter, because we get so consumed with things automatically by things that matter. And it kind of goes back to that video that you sent me the other day. I didn't watch all of it, but I watched some of it, and that's it. People are just being controlled by something, externally, a phone, a device, content, the news, football. When it wasn't social media, it was the news, and it was watching football or baseball, or watching the Andy Griffith show, or prior to that, it was poker. Who knows, right? There's always something to drown ourselves in, but very few people can find comfort in being alone and being still. Because most of the time, if you're alone, you're like, well, I could go work in the farm, or I could go work on the car, or I would go cut grass. So like, no, just fucking be still. Don't do anything for an hour. I couldn't do it. I need to do it. I want to do it, but I couldn't.
You know what's interesting? I don't know if I've gone an hour. I've done guided meditations of 30 minutes, 40 minutes. So I've been close. But again, this is guided, so it's not just me sitting there. But one of the things that I've wanted to build the freedom around, and this is honestly a goal for the future, is, how when you're in the middle of something, it doesn't matter what it is, but you have a good thought. And for the most part, what I tend to do is write a note somewhere so I can go back and revisit it. But in reality, like the depth of that thought after you revisit it is not the same as when you initially have the thought. What I want to be able to do is build freedom in a certain way to where when I have a random thought like that, I have the ability to dive into it right then, right there. Because that's usually the most I'm personally able to sit down and analyze, because the thought came by itself. And then sometimes I'll ask a question and the answer of the question goes right there. And initially that initial thought builds a bit of momentum. But when you're in the middle of something, you have to like, oh, crap, let me just write it down. And you literally kill that thought in that moment. And when that happens, I can never, not always, I've been able to get back into it if it's like within certain time frame. But it's always more difficult to get back into that thought. And that follow-up thought is going to be a little different based on what you're doing. And it's never exactly the same. I'd like the ability to be able to just do that and have the freedom to just listen to my thoughts and analyze them as they happen in this situation. Because sometimes you can't, right? Like you're in the middle of work meeting and you have a cool thing, you can make a note, but like you literally can't do anything about it. So that's just a very interesting kind of thing that I have as a goal, not anything that I'm actively working towards in terms of like, hey, make sure that I have this much space, but it's just something that I want to have the ability to do is literally sit down, have a thought, and just follow it when it happens, how it happens, and just let that happen. Because a lot of times, like if you sit down and meditate or you sit down and be quiet, like that's not when the thoughts pop up. They pop up in the middle of like when you're doing something. For me personally.
No, you're 100% accurate, dude. I was actually thinking through that for a second. Like the visual for me, and I know you're probably not gonna be a Harry Potter fan. That's okay. I accept that.
I've seen all of them like 3 times, bro. What's up?
Okay, that's good. All right, so when Dumbledore takes the thought out of his brain and puts it into the pool or puts it into the vial, that's what I think about. Because that thought strikes an emotion and a connection in your brain, right? Going and reliving it a second time. It's super hard. I've never heard somebody say that out loud other than me think it. So thank you for the connection there. But that's the visual that I have of being able to pull something out of my head and put it away for later on and going back to that same graphic for myself to be able to analyze that thought. Because in the moment, you're unable to analyze it because you feel it. So then you got to take a step back and jump back and watch it on screen and be like, all right, let me break this down. Why am I thinking that way? So I totally agree.
For me, it comes up with like ideas for conversation, right? Because like even with the other YouTube channel, like sometimes I'll think of a title or I'll think of a thumbnail or I'll think of a script, and if I'm out of the house, I can't like sit there and dive into it. But there's been a few occasions where I've been able to, and I will sit down and it's like the most glorious, beautiful thing. It just kind of like flows and it happens. And then I end up with like 1 or 2 pages of script where on certain times when that's not able, I come back and like, yeah, there's a title there, but like I can never dive as deep as I could instantly in that moment. And that's true for other types of thought. It's not just this. This is just like the really good, clear example that I have. But I mean, we put ourselves in situations where we literally can't process thoughts. And a lot of people don't want to, but it's a very interesting thing that we just have to be able to do is spend time in our brains, spend time thinking. That's where most work is done. That's where most achievement is had, is the people that can actually sit down with themselves and have that conversation, whatever it needs to be.
Here's my takeaway on that is I don't think people don't want to. I think people are unself-aware and they don't know what's possible. They just accept their fate as is. And they're just not, nobody's, you know what I'm saying? Like they're not conditioned or they are conditioned. I'm sorry. And so they're experiencing all these things in their life, pain, suffering, trial and tribulation, shit like that, but from the wrong point of view. Instead of like, okay, like it's necessary. Some of us are luckier than others. It is what it is. Some of us were born into a different family and we had generational wealth. Some of us were born into the exact opposite. But like we have the ability to decipher what is possible based on our thought process, and our belief systems in that thought process. B, changing our mindset on how we view something, right? And C, trying to find a balance in processing where you can question everything. Some people just don't question. And that was the other part of the docu-series, is that like he just questions everything naturally, doesn't mean anything negative by it. And, he's just questioning everything, Aaron Rodgers. And his thought process is like, to your point, and you said it, like how many people just go through life believing everything they've been taught and never questioning anything. Do you want to be that person really? And like, to your point, like maybe they do and they don't care. And there's something, and my wife and I have this debate all the time, and there's some things that she discusses that I just don't find relevant for me in that moment. And I'll be like, listen, you're probably accurate and you're probably not wrong by what you're saying. I just haven't dived into it, but I'm still naturally going to question it if I should want to argue about it, right? And until that time, I'm unable to really argue or not even argue, but build a case based on your point of view, whether it's positive or negative. I'm just naturally going to look into it and dispute it until I see not necessarily dispute it, but I won't. It really just comes down to like, hey, I can't even give you a point of view on something because I don't know anything about it. And you're probably right. You did a shit ton of research on it. I can't go down that rabbit hole right now, right? And I just stay away from it. So it's not that I don't care. It's that I'm going down my own rabbit holes, right? Until at another time, then I'll be like, you know what? It's time to research the JFK assassinations, or it's time to research, the big pharma. Like, I believe in all of those conversations. Like, you're just going to say, hey, take this pill and you're going to feel better. Why won't you question that? I know you're believing somebody who makes $200,000 a year because they went to school for 20 years, whatever it is, but it doesn't necessarily make them right all the time. Right. So, and I think that's his point of view. That's my point of view. You just get shunned a lot for it. I'm not going into the medical field specifically, but just like there's things that I question that I just don't believe in. And I don't think you're a bad person because you believe one way. I just don't believe in it. Don't hate me for it. Don't ridicule me for it. Don't think I'm stupid for it. Just understand. Seek to understand versus to be understood, right? Kind of comes back to that. But listen, if I had to chalk anything up out there for anybody that's listening, or just us, number one, like 2025 is gonna be a good year. I think there needs to be a reset for anybody out there, including myself, because you got to recharge your batteries, and you gotta really watch what you let in, right? Because there's a lot of outside noise. So for me, it's like, can I get rid of more garbage mentally? Can I shut some things off and literally turn down the volume? And I understand that something's always going to be going on, and I can't turn the volume to mute, but I can get pretty damn close to it, right? And my mind's going to have to pretend like it's on mute. And then the other bullet point would be just continuing to question, everything around me going into 2025. Just because we've gotten here based on this knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that everything that we've learned is accurate, right? So continue to question everything. That's the only way you're going to become a better player, better athlete, a better student, a better person, a better leader, whatever it is, right?
I want to close this off with a question, something for you to think about, something that I thought about literally while we were having this conversation. Have you ever looked back at previous notes, previous thoughts, and admired yourself, right? Going back, reviewing notes, reading what you were writing, reading what you were thinking about, or just looking back at a body of work and admiring what you were able to achieve. What were you thinking about when that happened? What were you doing? What were you focusing on? What was happening externally around that time where you did something that you currently find admirable? Analyze it. Think about it. Try to figure out why. What was going on in here, and try to recreate that so that you can literally recreate it. It may not be the achievement, but it may have to do with a state of mind in terms of a level of peace, a level of anger, a level of anxiety that you were going through that caused that thought to happen. But if it's something that you respect in your past, find a way to bring that into the future for future self, or find a way to recreate it, find a way to find that same state of mind that you were in. In terms of athletes, it's, let's just say, the champion mentality. In terms of work, it's just, when were you able to produce the most amount of work, or when did you get the best results? What was your life like in that moment? Actually think about it. There's something there. There's something that was there that may not be here now. This is something that I'm personally thinking about, is going back through my old journal entries and making sure that the things that I was focused on in the past, I've now been able to master and move forward into today, to where I don't have to think about it in the same level that I did before, but it's something that I can take action on. So find a time in your past where you admired your body of work, admired your notes, admired your thoughts. And remember, that's still the same person. You're still able to do all those things. You're still able to bring that into now. And then how do you actually expand and grow on that? Just a thought, something to think about for everybody that's out there. Something that I've been thinking about.